Come on in. Come on in. Yay. Okay. All right. Katie, are we good to go? Okay. All right. All right. So, welcome everybody to the San Francisco Dharma Collective. I'm MC Owens, and this is our Escape from Samsara, the Introduction to Buddhist Cosmology. This is the first in a series of presentations, visual presentations. I'm going to be giving here the last Friday of every month. So this is the first in a series. This is sort of like definitely where we need to begin this sort of series because there's a lot of information, background information in this presentation. The cosmology of Buddhism, that if you don't know this cosmology, all the other presentations I'm going to give will be less meaningful if you don't know this sort of, kind of the basic worldview that we're dealing with, right? This presentation basically has two parts, and it actually is just two images. That's all we're going to look at is two images. Part one is one image, part two is the second image, but they're such dense images with so much going on in them that it's going to take a good half hour to unpack them. So we're going to do part one. Part one is an introduction to what would be classical Indian cosmology. And what I mean by that is that the first part of this is just the basics of a worldview that Buddhism inherited, Jainism inherited, all these Indian traditions inherited. This it's just a way of seeing the world, where the world came from, where people come from, where dogs come from, all of that, right? And so the first part is just actually to get us up to speed so that the second part will actually be the escape, will actually be the Buddhist information that I've come to deliver to you here, right? So again, the first part should actually be review. Both parts actually should be review for all of us. Yeah, you've heard all of this before this time or lifetime ago or whatever. So this should really all seem very familiar. All right. Unlike my normal talks, I'm going to actually ask that if you have any questions, just wait till the end of the first part, right? And then we'll do questions on the first image, and then we'll do the second part, questions on the second image. All right. Cool. Escape from Samsara. Let's go. This is part one, creation. So again, this is where it all comes from, and I want everybody to sort of just check this out. Check this information out. This might be news to you. This might be old hat to you. I don't know. But this is sort of how it goes. I'm compiling this presentation from a bunch of sources, and like I normally do, I try to distill it down to like a general presentation that doesn't cover everybody. So if you know of that other tradition where it's like, nah, they don't do that, just hold on till the end of the first part, all right? So again, this is general view, very broad. This is how it goes. 20 kalpas. This period of creation, the first little part of this, takes 20 kalpas. What is a kalpa? Well, since we don't have any references, we're going to need a few references to understand how long of a time period a kalpa is. So here's how it goes. There's this disk of wind, right? Air, the air element, right? Vayu. And this would be called the Vayu chakra. And actually what I'm about to lay out for you is what's called the chakra vada, the way of the chakras. These chakras are these disks or wheels. Chakra literally means a wheel, but for this you want to be thinking of it as a disc, almost like an energetic vortex of some sort. And so about this vayu, about this wind, where does this wind come from? Hold off on that. We have to start somewhere. So don't worry too much about where this wind comes from initially. Just understand that there's this wind. Right? And on top of this wind, because this wind is winding, right, it's moving, it starts to build up some heat. And so this layer of Agni, or fire, develops on top of this. Now, this is where I'm not going to get too into the nitty-gritty here because different traditions sort of split here. But there are dimensions given to how big these discs are, these chakras. And so all I'm giving you is the relative relationship, which is that fire disk is smaller than the wind disk, okay? And so these things are just sort of, again, very general. And so what happens when this wind disk starts to get this heat and this Agni build up? Well, what happens when you start getting the heat building up, right? Well, you start to sweat a little bit. And so on top of this fire disk, there develops a apas, a water chakra, that forms on top of us, again, smaller than the fire chakra, smaller than the wind chakra. And as you can imagine, with just these elements, water, the fire, and air, or wind, together, we're going to get a kind of I'm going to call it this akasha, but if you've been to my talks on space, I'm not talking about an atmosphere necessarily of water vapor that's created from the interaction of the water and the heat. I've presented that for you so that your mind can be settled. But understand that the space element, akasha, is all of this. It's the space that allows for all of this to happen in. So just know that it's a subtle player in this, right? On top of the water, there forms this golden earth layer, an earth crust, right? This is called prithvi, earth, okay? And these, of course, are the four great elements: earth, fire, water, and air. And as this moves along, you may want to keep in mind that there's sort of a macrocosm, microcosm thing going on here. That what I have on the board here, this sort of elemental formation, this could be happening at the molecular level, at the smallest molecular level, or this could be the universe. All right, but I just want you to know it's kind of operating that way. That golden earth layer starts to crust over even more, forming what we would call land. And then from that land, there emerges this giant mountain, and then another mountain, and then another mountain, and these series of mountains that are kind of jutting up from this land mass. And these mountain ranges keep growing in the middle here as this protrudence grows until finally there emerges the central axis mundi, the mountain of the world called Mount Meru. And it's surrounded by 7 mountain ranges. Okay? This is a cosmic mountain. You see how it's rather oddly inverted, right? So the base part of the mountain would be a, quote, real mountain, like made of earth, but actually it gets to a point where it's made of lapis lazuli and sapphire, so it's actually rather blue-hued. And then they say this mountain actually gets to an apex, but then starts to get bigger again. And as you go on the bigger side of this, that gets almost like an umbrella, those are more sort of metaphysical realms. But hold off on all of that. But just know this is a mountain in the middle of our kind of world, this protrudence that grows surrounded by these 7 chakras, or these 7 mountains. And I should, now that we have a reference for everything, I want to mention how long a kalpa is, because this has taken, just to get here, several kalpas. Eons is what they would translate a kalpa as, right? So I'm not going to get too fancy with my animations here, so just hear the story. There's a story about a particular celestial being, a Devi, or a Deva, right? Who is sort of an inhabitant of this upper realms of Mount Meru, right? And this Deva has this gown made of this really like elven material, like elven silk. It's so soft, so fine, that really if it brushed up against you, you would barely feel it. It's so soft, this Deva's gown. So here's how long a kalpa is for reference as we go on, right? They say this Deva with this lovely silk dress flies by one of these lower mountains, once every 100 years. And they say her dress brushes across the mountain once every 100 years. A kalpa is the amount of time it takes for that activity to wear down the whole mountain. So those are the lengths of time that we're talking about here. Vast lengths of time. And it has probably taken 1 or 2 or 10 kalpas just to get to the point that we're at now in this story, okay? All right, so that's our central axis, Mount Meru. There is also, as this mountain protrudes up, there also spits into the, quote, atmosphere, the sun, the moon, and the stars. And I want you to know that that's why also time is a little difficult to talk about, because the sun and the moon, the reference for time, they just got made. They just got made. So time's a little different at this cosmic level than just rotations of the sun or something like that, right? So just want you to know that the sun, the moon, and the stars are all actually within our atmosphere that's below the umbrella, protective umbrella of Mount Meru. All right. There is also, I think, a ring, another chakra that is around the golden earth layer. This is called the chakravala, the ring of iron and ice. And yes, you guessed it, it is that ring of iron and ice that as this atmospheric climate gets going, it holds in the waters, right? So now we have our Mount Meru in the middle, 7 mountain ranges, sun, moon, and the stars, land masses. These land masses that are around Mount Meru are typically divided into 4 continents, 4 land masses. This southern one, they say, is triangular shape and more or less corresponds to India, that kind of shape of the subcontinent of India. That's the southern kind of landmass. To the east is Purva-Videha, to the north, Uttarakuru, to the west, Godaniya. So those are the 4 continents. And again, they are traditionally given these shapes of what they look like. And you can kind of see how India sort of is triangular shape if you think about it the right way, right? Maybe that's China and Russia. Maybe that's North and South America. Maybe that's Europe. Don't know, right? There's a lot of speculation about what these things are and what this is a map of, right? Okay, so now that we have all of that, we're going to get into some realms. The first is our realm, the earthly realm, on the golden earth crust layer on the 4 continents, or at the base of these mountains, even the base of Mount Meru. So these are the realms in which you have Manusya, humans, or these animals. And of course, there are a variety of humans and there's a variety of animals in the realms, right? So just hold off on that, but just know these are the major divisions of earthly dwelling beings. As I mentioned, the Mount Meru is kind of a cosmic mountain and certainly the upper tiers, and so you have 2 celestial realms, the demigods called asuras, and then, as I mentioned, the devas, or these celestial beings, angelic beings, things like that. So they hang out at the base of Mount Meru or at the top part of Mount Meru. And again, I'll get in because just like there's a lot of kinds of humans and animals, there's lots of asuras and devas. And then, of course, we need to talk about the lower realms, the Preta Loka. Preta are the hungry ghosts. And then the Narakas, the hell dwellers. And those are, of course, below the earth. Yeah? And those 3 areas constitute 6 paths of existence. These are the 6 general ways it has been understood in India that these are the 6 general paths of rebirth. You can be either reborn as a Naraka hell dweller, a Preta hungry ghost, any number of animals, types of animals, any number of types of humans, or a demigod or a god, kind of a deva. So again, and that stretches all the way from the bottom of our, quote, world system, basically to the top of Mount Meru. All right? So let's get into these a little bit so we know. I'm going to start us in the happy place, at the top. So now we're going to talk about Mount Meru and the inhabitants of Mount Meru, of which there are many. Typographically, I couldn't get this to line up like I would like. So just follow me here. The asuras are these demigods. And by the way, these asuras, they're powerful beings. They're just not very nice. They're like very powerful, very kind of strong in a number of ways, but they've kind of earned their reputation as gods by their might, okay? And they are supposedly hang out at the base of Mount Meru. Above them are the realm of the four great kings. These are four great heavenly beings that actually hang out in the four corners of the earth, kind of near the top of the first part of Mount Meru. And what's interesting about these four great rajas, the Maharajas there, is that they supposedly protect the earth from bad cosmic rays from outside of it. You hear about the four great kings, and they sound like the atmosphere. They sound like a personification of the atmosphere. And then above that, stretching all the way up the inverted triangle of Mount Meru, are 33 levels of heaven guarded by Shakra Devanam Indra. Indra is considered the god of our vaulted ceiling. So our stars, sun and moon that we see, that's actually Shakra's realm. And that only is part of the upper part of Mount Meru. We're going to go way beyond that, by the way. So I'm just letting you know that Chakra's realm, the 33 levels of heaven, right? Those are actually all sort of down here in our world. At the very top of the upside down part of Mount Meru, the very top, and that's why I wish that line was lining up with the very top there, you reach the heaven of Yama. Yama is the judge. Actually, Yama means the watcher. And there is if you're familiar with like The Watchmen, and I don't mean the comic book or the show, but sort of the Jehovah's Witness idea of these kind of the watchmen, well, they seem to have something to do with Yama, and actually even the levels of 33 heaven, these are the 7 heavens, by the way. So there's a lot of crossover in cosmologies that you're going to probably be picking up on, where you're going to be like, wait a minute, don't the Christians talk about that? Wait a minute, don't the Jews talk about that? Well, there's been a lot of sharing of these ideas. So I just want you to know that these 33 levels of heaven and these 7 heavens, So Yama, the watcher, and I'm going to have a little bit more to say about Yama in a minute, but he's the judge, and apparently all souls go before Yama to have their karma judged. And then whether you go down or further up, it'll be depending on Yama. Above Yama is the Tushita heaven, where the joyful devas live, and many a bodhisattva hang out in to the Tushita heaven. And then above that, you have these 2 heavens. One is the delighting in creation. That's actually where you just get to manifest stuff in front of you, and you're like, whoa, oh wow, oh wow. What's crazier is that above that, and I haven't translated it well, that top heaven of the realm of desire, it's a realm actually in which others create for you, for your delight. So you don't even have to sweat creating stuff. It's that cushy up at that heaven. One thing I want you to know is that all of these realms, the hell realms, the earthly realm, animal realm, asura realm, all the godly realms, so far, all of these have been in the realm of desire. That's where we live, is the realm of desire. And so even if you're a god or a demigod, you're still in this realm of desire, okay? Okay, let's talk Narakas. These are the hell realms. Now, what's interesting about Indian cosmology is they have 8 hot hells, right? Starting at the not so bad hot hell, the Sanjiva, the reviving hell. Now, this is a hell where, there's a lot going on in this hell. I'll give you just one little example of what reviving means. So apparently in this hot hell, one thing that could happen to you is that you're immediately reborn in this hot hell, standing in front of this blazing hot pillar. It's an iron pillar that's just like red hot. And for some reason, you have the uncontrollable desire as soon as you're born to grab it. And you go, ah! And you die. only to be reborn in that same hell to see the iron pole, and you're like, ah! And you die, and it's just this Sisyphusian nightmare of grabbing this pole and dying. And so that's the reviving hell. The black thread, the crushing, Rarava, the screaming hell, Mahararava, the great screaming hell, the tapana. If you know about tapas, this is the tapana. Things are heating up. The Mahatapana, the great heating, and then finally the lowest, hottest hell is called Avicii, uninterrupted. And you will often hear in Buddhism, they'll talk about the Avicii hell. I want you to know that as you go down, the length of time that you spend in that hell gets longer and longer. And the reason why this one is called uninterrupted, it's because basically once you're there, you're there. Period. And it's bad, right? So they say this is the worst hell, even though there are 8 cold hells below that. There is the hell, the blister, the burst blister, the shivering, hahava, the lamentation, the hell of chattering teeth, the hell of cracked skin, and then don't get excited about the Padma Naraka, because what the Blue Lotus is describing are these welts that from the cold. Your body starts to welt up into these things that look like lotus flowers, and it's bad. And then in the Maha Padma, the Great Blue Lotus, you basically get there. It's so cold, you just watch yourself blister and explode, only to be again reborn there, to witness it again. But the idea, though, is that your time in this hell is much less than in the Avicii hell. So there's something, this idea that if you're right in the middle of the lower realms, it's worse. There's something that it would be better to be out at the edges, where it's just cold and you're just shivering. Like, that would be better than to be in the Avicii hell. All right, so we 16 levels of hell below the earth. Oh, that's our last one, sorry, Mahapadma. So 16 levels of hell are chakras, earth, mountain ranges, Meru, sun, moon, and stars. All right, so we're going to go back up now that we have the whole thing, because that was just the realm of desire. All right, and part of the game in India, by the way, forever and ever and ever and ever, was to try to win the rebirth lottery, to try to get reborn out of being an animal or a miserable human, and you were trying to get up. You were trying to level up to the heavenly realms, and you were trying to avoid declining to the hell realms. That was the name of the game. And so you were interested in performing good acts or virtuous acts or whatever it was, you were interested in doing it to try to get a better rebirth. And the best rebirths were these. The ones that are actually sort of transcendent even of Meru in a way. They're above Meru, and these are, of course, like I said, the Yama heaven, Shita heaven, and then the other 2 heavens. But there is a space or a realm above that. And this is where we get into this space, the Rupa Dhatu. This is the realm of the meditator. This is the realm of the spiritual practitioner who's now going to transcend the realm of desire. So hell realm, even the heavenly realms of desire. And the first realm of pure form is called, there are 3 levels to the first level. These are the Brahma worlds. Brahma is also a god, right? So now we have Yama as some sort of judge, Shakra Indra, who's the god of the 33 heavens, but then above that is Brahma, who, in some traditions, Brahma created all of this, but not in this tradition. Brahma is a subject being, just like all the rest of us, but he's a pretty powerful being, and so his first heavenly realm is a bunch of his ministers that you can go hang out with, then a bunch of his counselors, and then the highest Brahma heaven is Mahabrahma heaven, where you actually are hanging out with Brahma, right? You've made it past his ministers and counselors there. And access to this first Brahma world is achieved through obtaining the first dhyana, the first meditative absorption, all right? But there is, of course, a realm above that. And so above the first dhyana is the second dhyana heaven. This one of this, you'll see this, the first layer of it is called limited light, then limitless light, and then possessing splendor. And that's the sort of the name of this level is the Abhasvara, right? And again, accessing this level is available to the second dhyana meditation. But of course, there's a third level even above that. And if you've been coming to the classes here, you know all about these dhyana realms. And so this is sort of a new look at these dhyana realms. These are the Subhakrishna heavens, the beautiful heavens, limited beauty, limitless beauty, and then complete, absolute, total beauty. These correspond to the third dhyana heaven. And then we are going up to the fourth dhyana heaven, the Britpala, right? So this is where there are the cloudless devas, the devas which are the offspring of merit or punya, the level of great reward, and then this really wild, at the very highest level of the fourth dhyana heaven are the asamyasattvas or asanyasatta, the beings without perception. They're not perceiving anything, they're imperceivable. They are a unique class. And if you thought, wow, that's pretty far up, that's pretty far out there, it's not all the way out there because there's a heaven above that in the realm of pure form that doesn't get spoken about too much, Sudavasa, which is the abode of these non-returners that you might have heard of, right? The first level is not falling, meaning not falling back down into the world here, untroubled by anything having to do with the world, beautiful, clear-seeing, and then Akanishta heaven, the highest heaven. And in Buddhism, you will hear from the Avicii hell to the Akanastita, I cannot say Akanasta heaven. That, Avicii to that heaven, that's like all of existence, sort of, kind of. Because there is one more place to go. And even though everybody does it, I do it, I'm going to do it, I'm going to put it above this. This is the formless realm. So we are in a realm of formlessness. There is nothing to understand this by. There's no shape, there's no color, there's no number, there's certainly no space or time to this realm. And so to put it up there is like just convenient. It's nowhere in that sense. It's beyond in that way, this formless realm. And of course, there are 4 levels to the formless realm: the realm of infinite space, the realm of infinite consciousness, the realm of infinite nothingness. And then the highest, furthest out there place one can go is the state of neither perception nor non-perception. This is not a class in meditation, so I'm not going to talk about what those states are like. This is a class in cosmology. So here we have it. All of that, from the formless realm all the way down to the hot hells, all of the cold hells, this is what's called a loka dhatu. The word loka in Sanskrit is where we get the word local, loci, locus. All of that words that have to do with local, locality, come from the word loka, the Sanskrit. And then dhatus are these realms we've been talking about. Heavenly dhatus, hellish dhatus, and all of that. And so when you have them all together in what's called a world system, that's a loka dhatu. All right? Okay. That's the period of creation. That took 20 kalpas for all of that to happen. For the discs to form, for all the mountains to form, to all the life, all the realms to be populated, all of that. It takes 20 kalpas for that. And during that time, that first period, that first 20 kalpa period, they say the lifespan of all beings is infinite. Meaning that once you got born as a animal or a human or whatever, you're that forever, or at least during that first period of creation, those 20 kalpas. Because then we enter into this period of duration, which also lasts 20 kalpas. And it's during this period that everything's happening. World's going around. People dying, people living. Because during this period of duration, which is 20 kalpas long, something weird happens during that very first kalpa of the period of duration. The lifespans of human beings, I'm just going to stick with the human beings, The lifespan of human beings go from infinite down to, I think, like 80,000 years. And then they start shrinking and getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller until it reaches the very lowest point where the lifespan of human beings is no more than 100 years. And then the second kalpa begins of the period of duration in which the lifespan of human beings starts to increase again. Gets all the way back up to 80,000 years or so, on a good day. And then the third kalpa starts, and the lifespans start to drop down again. And this period of the lifespans of all beings, not just human beings, goes up and down and up and down and up and down for 20 kalpas. Then we move into a period of 20 kalpas in which it takes for the world to be destroyed. Here's our Lokadhatu. And then these 7 suns appear out of nowhere. 7 suns. And they start to scorch our Lokadhatu. Our 4 Maharajas are up there like, oh my God, I can't take it. And then boom, it burns up all the hell realms, burns up the earth realm, burns up the Chakravala, burns up the mountain ranges, burns up the sun and the moon and the stars, burns up Mount Meru, burns up the earth, or the earth layer, water layer, fire layer, wind layer. That first desire realm of heaven, realm of Yama, Tushita heaven, and then even that first dhyana, to the point where only people in the highest of the 3 second dhyana heavens, the ones possessing splendor, and above, remain, because they're in this ethereal meditative space. And then a period of nothingness for 20 kalpas. Nothing. No Lokadhatu, nothing. And then after 20 kalpas, this wind disk appears. But now I think we might have a slightly better idea of where this wind disk came from to begin with. What they say about this wind disk is that it's sort of like either the last little residual karma of that world system. And when I mean residual karma, I'm not talking about demerit points and merit and all that. I'm talking about like the last little angular trajectory of the world before it got finally burnt up and it was kind of headed that way. There is a remnant of that trajectory. And so what happens is that after 20 kalpas, we get a world again. And so this is a little thing about this cosmology, is that the animals and the humans and the hell dwellers and all of that, they all originate from these upper realms that didn't get burnt up. And what happens is that eventually those beings in those upper realms, they get either bored or desire filled or something, and they start slipping back down and populating the world. And then there's that 20-year period of duration in which people are dying, being reborn. I'm an animal, I'm a human. Oh, I made it to an Asura level, back down to an animal level, Deva Rose. And it's just this constant, this rebirth process, up and down, people trying to go up, but then they mess up, they go down, up. For 20 kalpas, that happens. And then destruction for 20 kalpas, in which, again, the 7 suns appear and burn up everything up to the second dhyana heaven. And then 20 kalpas of nothingness. And then what happens is, after 7 suns have appeared, the 8th time, it's a giant deluge. It's a giant flood. And again, that's after 7 destructions by the fire of the 7 suns, but this wipes out everything up to the 3rd dhyana. So even if you were shown in that 2nd dhyana heaven, after enough time, this deluge is going to come get you. 20 kalpas of nothingness. We have our upper layers there. There's that wind disk again. 20 kalpas of creation, 20 kalpas of duration, and then after 7 destructions by water, which would be 49 destructions by fire, right? So you get the 7 fires, a flood, 7 fire, flood, 7 fire, flood. 7 deluges later, you get this giant hurricane wind vortex that's obviously much bigger than our initial wind vortex, and that wipes out everything up to the very highest level of the 4th dhyana, those beings of non-perception. You might understand why they get to stick around. They have no perception at all, and they're imperceivable in that sense, right? 20 kalpas and nothingness. And then, again, from those upper layers, the world is born again. Here's the thing about it. So you might have noticed right away we're dealing with a cyclical cosmology here. This just goes around and around and around. By the way, in case you were wondering, that's it. That's it. There's no more bigger, crazier destruction than that hurricane wind thing that happens. And what that meant at the time of the Buddha was that there are many people that believed that if you made it to the formless realm, the highest, or the realm of the non-returners, or the highest heaven of the 4th dhyana, they thought you're good. You're good. Untouchable. Untouchable by the fire, untouchable by the water, untouchable by the wind. You're beyond a god. You're good. Right? So this was the prevailing thought at the time of the Buddha. So the reason why you should meditate, the reason why you should do good actions, the reason why you should study, the reason why you should do the practice is so that you can make it to that higher realm and avoid destruction by fire and water and wind. Okay? The Buddha, however, supposedly at his time explored all these realms, studied with everybody that taught him how to get into all these realms, and he had a great realization that makes the Buddhist tradition very different than other traditions. Other traditions that might be trying to get somewhere up or down or this and that, the Buddha sort of realized, well, he realized a few things. One, he realized that all those beings that are in those upper realms, they do eventually fall back down. Given enough time, they fall back down and will eventually fall back down to earth as humans and potentially fall all the way down to the Avicii hell. So that's thing number one the Buddha realized, is that there is no, one of the Buddhist foundations of the idea is that there is no permanent state. This is what's called impermanence. This is what's called everything's constantly changing. So there's no exalted state of escape, A. And B, and this is probably more important for the Buddhist, those exalted states of escape or liberation are all predicated on, relative to, and determined by a bunch of people living in hell and a bunch of people living not in heaven. Meaning your exalted state is dependent upon and is relative to my not so exalted state. That doesn't sound so exalted to me if it's so relative, right? So that's the Buddhist idea, is that he got taught how to explore all these realms. They say that right before he got enlightened, he actually looked up and could see all the way up to the Akanasthita heaven and all the way down to the Avicii hell. And this crazy thing happened where the whole earth sort of turned upside down or on its side or something. It was like a wild event where he could see what you're seeing now. See the whole world in all of its complexity, right? And so, rather than playing the game of how do I get to a better rebirth, the Buddha came up with something entirely different. But if you didn't know about all of this, then the next thing I'm going to have to say wouldn't make much sense. Any questions about all of this? Mm-hmm. Bardos are these more ethereal, ether-like, non-physical realms that sort of are, they're kind of, I'd say they're cousins to that space Akasha realm in that way, where it's sort of pervasive everywhere. So it's sort of in here. Yeah, can't get too into that. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes, sir. ah, yeah, burned up, burnt up.
Yeah, but physical, but is a spirit also like here, or it's kind of a
Oh, right. Mm, as this see, that question like that is difficult to answer because some people say they are gone, gone, gone. Some people say no. So, yeah. But the idea is though is that they're gone, gone, gone because the realms in which they would be reborn. Because the seven suns appeared and I got burnt up. I would go to hell, but there's no hell for me to go to. I would go. There's no place for me to go anymore. Is kind of the idea. And they need or they want to reserve those upper levels for people who earned it, if you know what I mean. So, yeah.
So then, if they're gone, 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 so then they, in a sense, escaped.
No, there's.
Or do they get reborn again once the copas start up again? Do they get re-put somewhere, or is this just not a question?
Yeah, and you also have to keep in mind, that we're dealing, and I sort of just glossed over this, but you have to keep in mind that we're all dealing with a sort of a whole, a culture and a worldview that from the jump, they believe in these sort of souls reincarnating. So this particular formation of the self is not so important to the equation. So if the seven suns come and burn this up, well, whatever, I'm going to just get reborn as an animal or whatever. The problem with this final destruction is, like I was just saying, there's nowhere to go anymore. And so it becomes a real philosophical debate of what happens to those, quote, souls. But of course, if we're Buddhists, we know there was no soul to begin with. There's just an illusion that's created from that initial coagulation and aggregation of energy. But I'm going to get there. We're going to escape. We're going to get free. So we really shouldn't have to worry about all these suns. Right? All right. Should we move on? This is image number 1, by the way. I got tired of copyright infringing and stealing everybody else's art, so I just made my own finally that I could animate. But this was our first image, classic image again, by the way, of the Indian cosmology that again the Buddhists adopted. This is the way the Buddhists see it going. Yes, sir. Da, 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 da. Most of the information about this stuff for Buddhism comes from the Abhidharma, which is a bunch of texts, right? It's a bunch of stuff. But then the Abhidharma, people filter it out, and there's a Tibetan book here called Myriad Worlds. This is like I forget, 12th, 13th century. So there's an old text there where somebody put it all together. So this is a more Tibetan one, and I'll leave this up here if you want to come see it. And then this book, Buddhist Cosmology, is a guy that just took all the cosmological elements from the Abhidharma, from this, that, and all I'm doing actually is regurgitating that book. So, my pleasure. All right, so then let's figure out how to get out of here. Yeah? Oh, and also escape from samsara. Again, this is samsara, the cycle of birth and death and rebirth, and not just your birth, death, and rebirth. Did you notice it's the whole world being born and dying and being born and dying? So this cyclicality to the whole thing, it's, again, individual, atomic, and macrocosmic universe, right? Okay, yes? I know. We're at the end of the bad kalpa, where the lifespan of human beings is no more than 100 years. So we are actually at the lowest, and somebody figured this out, and we've got a ways to go before the suns arrive. So, a kalpa or two, a couple kalpas. So, yeah. Yep. So I wanted to mention that about, and I tried to in terms of the sun and the moon and the stars all being in this. Anything that would be a wandering star planet is in this system here. So any planet it's not going to be over here. It's very much in this. Yeah. And I just want you to know too that the upper realms, the heavenly realms, and the dhyanas are spatially located. So even though the meditator is feeling like, oh, I'm having a good meditation in the Zendo today, the idea is that those spaces are actually hundreds of thousands of miles above you. spatially, and they get higher and higher and higher, and that actually the planets, stars that we know of and see at night are below these heavenly realms. So just keep that all in mind. And also, you all seem to be doing a pretty good job at it, but I just want to remind you, I know this might sort of fly in the face of our modern cosmology, and this is not meant to replace our modern cosmology. They say in Buddhism that this is the way the divine eye sees the world. So not necessarily the physical eyes, but the divine eye sees and understands this. And what I mean by that is that the modern person might be like 18 levels of hell, and they're talking literally spatially below the earth. That might seem a little Sunday school nonsense to some of us, but think negative energies, positive energies, think gravitas and levitas, right? Levity and gravity. These ideas of like things, the heavy energy sinking down and down and down, and the lighter, more refined energies moving to the top. Think of that if you have a problem with the idea of there being hells down there, if you know what I mean. Again, this could be happening at a molecular level in each atom, and then at a grand scale. All right, let's get out of here. Part 2. Escape. So here's the thing. We've got this world system, and I've already mentioned to you that there's Indra, Shakra Devanam Indra, who's the god of our sky, like Zeus. Pretty powerful god. But there's Brahma above him. Again, we've got Yama, the judge of all of us at the end of the day, right? But there's one being that the Buddhists sort of hone in on as like, that's the one you need to deal with. That's the bad guy, so to speak. And this isn't considered, he's not considered a god. And even within Buddhism, this being, Mara, right? Who, Mara has the world in its grips. Mara, whose name means death. So Mara means death. Take a good look at death. The idea here is that Mara is sort of, again, in Buddhism, not a god or anything, but is truly a personification of our collective greed, hatred, and delusion. Right? So the Buddhists are like, no, we all have this seed of greed, hatred, and delusion in us, and we could think of it like this. 5 skulls in the head, traditionally representing the 5 skandhas. And again, you will notice that this Mara has the whole Lokadhatu, the whole world system in its grips. Even the formless realm in its grips. And the Buddha is said to have achieved enlightenment and became a Buddha by defeating Mara. So let's find out how to defeat Mara. So this image is the Bhava Chakra. So we're dealing with chakras, chakra as a wheel. This is the Bhava Chakra, the wheel of life. This is actually not too different than the image I was just showing you. It's just a little different, and it's a traditional, I think, Nepalese kind of version of it. The story is that the Buddha drew the original one of these in sand on the ground, in its general form. Not so decorative, but in this general sequence that I'm about to walk you through. So this is called this whole thing, it would be called a mandala, or mandala, and the word mandala means a circle, and this is our mandala proper, if you will. This is the circle, the mandala itself, of which Mara is sort of holding. And there's multiple parts to this. And we're going to start, and that's Mara holding the whole mandala, but we're going to start in the very, very center there. This is considered the axle of samsara. This is the axle upon which the whole wheel of life turns, all right? This is in the middle, and it is traditionally a rooster, but like a fowl, some sort of a bird, a snake, and a pig. And these represent the 3 kleshas, or the 3 poisons. The bird, the fowl, represents raga, attachment or greed. Dvesha, or aversion is represented by the snake. You want to, of course, avoid snakes, but snakes are also prone to snapping, which is this idea of aversion. And then finally, delusion or moha, which is represented by this pig. These three, our attachment, our greed, our wanting, our hatred or our aversion, and our ignorance or our delusion. These are the three things that are keeping the whole thing going, right? And again, this is Mara's realm, and I want you to keep in mind that Mara's name means death, because what? That whole first half of the presentation, rebirth as of this or that, rebirth is up here, oh, I'm down here, oh, I'm up here. It's all predicated on dying, death. And rebirth, great, rebirth, but it's all about dying. And so this idea of like, oh, I figured out a better way to die, guys. The Buddha's like, how about not dying? How about that, right? So these three are the if you think of Mara as just laughing all the time, right? Well, every time that we are attached or greedy, full of aversion or hatred or full of delusion, Mara's just like, gotcha. And that's, again, the hub that this spins on it. And if you're like a Shravaka, you're a voice hearer or a monk, and you want to get to Nirvana, just focus on the middle. That will control it. If you control your greed, hatred, and delusion, it'll get you right to Nirvana. The next ring of this, the next rung of this, outside of our initial one, is this one. And this, of course, is just a depiction of either being dragged down to hell or the stairway to heaven, right? That's all that's going on here. You got a yin and yang thing going on, kind of like what I was talking about, negative energy, positive energy, thick, heavy, what do they call that? That tamasic energy, right? And that rajasic energy. That's what's going on here, right? I'm trying to keep this microphone going, but... Okay. And again, this is sort of the idea that depending on how you control your greed, hatred, and delusion, will depend on which way you're going. So there's that. Then we get to our next rung. These are the 6 rebirths. We've talked about the 6 rebirths. These will just give you a little image. This is a little village, a human realm. Look at little houses, little dwelling places, right? Here's our next realm. The preta, the hungry ghost realm. You see them with their big extended stomachs, and they have these tiny little razor-thin necks so they can't actually fit anything in. So they're just constantly hungry and and they can't literally fit anything in. Imagine being like really thirsty and it just kept falling out the back of your neck. That's the idea of these. You don't want to be a preta. And now the lowest is the hell realm, the narakas. This is a pot of people being boiled, torture, all of that. And that's Yama. Now, traditionally, Yama is represented as being in hell, but I want you to know that in traditional Indian cosmology, the idea is that everybody gets to take a trip up to heaven. Everybody gets to go before Yama, and that actually he's up there. And you get judged, and then you'll get sent down, drawn and quartered, all of that. It's bad. It's bad down there. Right? Then we have our animal realm, Noah's Ark here, right? And now this is sort of interesting. This is the Asura realm. And you'll notice the archers up here. I didn't mention this about the Asuras. They're at the base of Mount Meru, and they're constantly trying to get to the top of Mount Meru, right? So these archers are the Asuras constantly waging war with the Devas, trying to get into like the higher heavens. And then this, the highest one here, is our heavenly realms. This is sort of the peak top of Mount Meru here, also sort of trying to show it going the other way. Not everybody likes to fully show it going that way. It's always a little weird. So sometimes they just do it like that. And you'll notice here are some devas that are aiming that way, and they're guarding the upper realms from the asuras, right? So there's that. So those are our 6 paths of rebirth, which of course are the up and down motion depending on how we handle our greed, hatred, and delusion. Now the secret why I brought you here all tonight, why you've been waiting here an hour, is to learn how to get out of here, right? This is the secret. This is the Buddhist sort of secret to escaping samsara. You'll notice it's the very edge of the bhava chakra, right? So this is a quick breakdown of the edge that's called the 12. These are the 12 link chain of causation, okay? Pratitya samutpata, right? And the first link is, if I did it, yep, is this one called avidya. This is ignorance. This is key for Buddhism. The whole situation here for Buddhism is that we don't really understand what's going on here. We don't really understand what's going on here. It's sort of like a foggy dream that we kind of just woke up in, meaning born in, but we're just kind of like, wait, what's going on here? Huh. And we don't really have everything figured out yet, but our drives, our wanting drive and our aversion drive are in full effect. And so before we even have everything figured out here, we're like, yeah, give me that. Ooh, yeah, I don't want any of that. And the idea is it all stems from not knowing what's going on. That's what the Buddhists mean by avidya, or ignorance, or the delusion, right? This is not an original sin problem or anything like that. It's actually literally we just woke up. We've just been reborn, and we're a little foggy about it. That's the first problem. Ignorance. And the interesting thing about this link in the chain here is you'll notice that there's an old guy here and there's a young guy there, and the young guy's pointing that way. He's being like, yo, that way. But the old guy, he's going to go this way. All right? So the wisdom would have been to look the other way, but he's like, no, let's keep going. And so from that ignorant state arise these things called samskara, mental conditioning. So this is the idea that it's like I've had this foggy dream wake up, and then I'm kind of reinforcing this behavior that's all delusional. And so that, they say, is like forming these pots. That's what that's sort of being represented here, is this sort of forming these mental patterns or mental conditioning habits that, again, all arise from the ignorance. What's going to be happening here is a chain of causation that from ignorance arises this bad mental conditioning. And from that bad mental conditioning arises, I don't know why, he's up in a tree, our consciousness. So our actual, the firing of thoughts, which they liken to the ripening of fruit in the mind, that you have these delusional ideas that eventually ripen and become an idea, and you're like, ooh, I'm thinking of something. And we think we thought it, that we're the owner of these things and not just the experiencer of them. And so our vijnana, or our consciousness, the fruition of the seeds of thought, arise from the samskara, which arise from the ignorance, right? And then that from the consciousness arises namarupa, name and form. So as soon as I have consciousness, I can now go around the world naming things based on their form and shape, which is all coming from the consciousness, which is coming from the conditioning, which is coming from the ignorance. Oh, and that's like being like a boat going down a river. The idea of namarupa, name and form, is that we're on autopilot. Our thinking is on autopilot, right? We just go to school and we get conditioned, we get shown objects, letters, and conditioned, and then we're on autopilot. That's part of the idea of just on the stream, going with the stream, hardly against it, right? And then from that name and form arises the 6 sense bases, the sadayatana, which they liken to being like the 6 windows of a castle, right? Or like just the windows or the ways in which you look out. So these windows to the world, the eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, the body, and the brain, the 6th sensory organ, those arise from name and form. The idea being that I'm conscious, going around the world naming and, oh look, bunch of books. Oh look, a Buddha, right? And then, oh look, eyes seeing. That's a name and form like a situation. Oh look, ears hearing. So the discrimination or discernment of the world into 6 types of media comes from the naming and forming habit of the consciousness, which arises from the conditioning, which arises from the ignorance. Everybody with me? Cool. All right. Next, we have our friend showing off all his garden to a lady friend of his. It is from our 6 sensory organs. It's from our eyes, our ears, our nose, our tongue, our body, and our brain that we have sparsha, contact with this world, contact via our body, contact via our eyes, contact via our ears, right? They're getting into a little contact there, right? But that contact could not have arisen without the 6 sense organs, that could not have arisen without the distinction of name and form from consciousness, from the conditioning, right? Once we've had contact, there arises a vedana, this sensation. Now he's having a bite of fruit underneath the tree, having a sensation. Our sensations, which arise from the contact, which arise from the sensory organs, which arise from the conscious, or name and form, consciousness, conditioning to ignorance. From that, now he's having a drink. From the contact, which gives rise to a sensation, there then arises the thirst. And that thirst is a craving, and it's craving for either more of that or less of that. So in Buddhism, they talk about craving and desire, but if it's your first time really thinking about Dharma, it's helpful to know that they're not just referring to this action of craving. Craving can be this too. I crave for you to get out of my face. That kind of a movement, right? So craving kind of works both ways that way. And so wanting, the thirst, the desire, again, that can be for something or against something in that way. And that thirst, of course, arises from the sensations, going all the way back around the chain. And then, of course, after that thirst, man, we got buckets out. Now, woo! Upadana, attachment. Because as soon as I've got that craving, then I'm not going to let go. It's just this. You see the Dharma developing here, where it's like, oh, is that what's going on here? That's what's going on here. This attachment which arises from craving, thirst, tanha, which arises from all these other things, right? And then, of course, from the attachment arises getting it on. Now, this is bhava, becoming. Bhava means life as well. So the idea here, the idea of this cell, this portion, is that I've got my fruit trees, I met the lady under the tree, I took her on a date, now I've got buckets of fruit, I got a wife, I got a castle. You saw the castle with the 6 windows. I got a castle, got a whole operation here, I got an orchard, I got farms. And so this idea of the becoming is this idea of, well, traditionally becoming was coitus and conception, actually. The way the whole life thing keeps going, the way people keep reproducing, the way becoming keeps happening is because of the attachment, because of the thirst, da-da-da-da-da. So this is traditionally this sort of idea of hooking up, getting a mate, starting a family, because you've settled down and you have property and all of that. So there's a lot going on with this mandala, but that's where we're at here, step 10. And then, of course, once you have the conception, you have the jati, or the birth. That's a woman giving birth. So again, we are literally seeing where babies come from, why they're made. They're made because of thirst and attachment and all that idea. And of course, that which is born is fated to die. Marana, death. And there's that word mara, death. Here's the guy. That's a corpse. Those are buzzards. Like, yeah, keep coming this way, buddy. That's what they're saying. They're saying, keep going this way. So he's off to die. in order to be reborn in ignorance. And the whole idea, it's what I said in the beginning, is that the basic idea of Buddhism is that we go through this rebirthing process, and when we come out, we're like, what just happened? Where am I? Who am I? Who are you? And it's so foggy, but before we get things really figured out, we just start going on instinct. Yeah, give me more of that, give me more of that. Creating formations of the mind. That's creating ideas of the six senses. Oh, if I have more of that, it'll make me happy. Leading to the contact, leading to the sensations, leading to the craving, leading to the attachment. This is what the Buddha is said to have realized, that this 12-link chain of causation, these 12 links, and by the way, these 12 are just a way of thinking about it, meaning that each of these split off into hundreds of thousands of dependently originated things. There's a sutra in which the Buddha says, regarding the craving and attachment, from attachment leads to the picking up of stick and sword and defending, and that leads to murder and that. So like there's ways in which all the world, all of it arise from this interaction. And what's being spoken about here, of course, is that going around this ring is that up until the Buddha and Buddhism, people were like, oh, I got to watch what I say. I got to watch what I do. Maybe I should meditate. And the idea was so that when I die, I'm set. Better rebirth. Maybe I'm going to go to heaven. The Buddha is talking about this process that the whole Mara's game, the whole world, the whole Lokadhatu, the realm of desire, it's all being created by our collective desiring. And that the way to really get out, the way to really get released is to not have the attachments, not have the desire. The way to really get out is to listen to our young friend. And rather than going headlong into life, grabbing ravenously at everything, we should take a moment first to look at and think about where we came from. Think about what caused all of this to begin with, and go this way. Oh, you mean death is because things are born. Oh, and birth is only because of conception, desire. That's only because of the attachment, and attachment is because of the craving. Craving comes from the contact and the sensations, and that arises from that and that and that. The idea being that to really understand this origination of this world, and then to just be like, oh, psst, I'll just squelch the flame of desire. That's the liberation. And so what happens in this mandala here, once it's all jazzed up here, is that you'll notice there's two people we haven't talked about. Up in the corner is a monk, and he's pointing that way. And he's pointing to the Buddha. He's actually pointing, it's this Buddha. The red-bodied Buddha is Amitabha Buddha. That's not even our Buddha, Shakyamuni, whatever. That Buddha actually has his own Lokadhatu that isn't our Lokadhatu, and it's to the west. And you can go there. He's his own world. And actually, that was a misrepresentation because Amitabha's Pure Land doesn't have hell realms. It's all been purified. It's all animal realm. And the animals are like cool too. They're like, they'll hang out with you, all kinds of stuff. So it's like really cool animal realm, nice human realms, and then heavenly realms all the way up. Right? So yeah, I've just used my old Lokadhatu there, but that. And so the idea here of this image is that, the idea of this image is that the Buddha and his monks, they're out. They're not in samsara. They're not held by Mara. This is why the story of Buddhism is that the Buddha defeated Mara, defeated death, right? Questions about our last part here? Yes, sir.
One of the ayatonas that you taught us was to meditate on what we were like before we were born. Is that the top of the circle?
No, that particular one is a kind of a Zen koan about meditating on what your face looked like before you were born. And that one is more about trying to...
Or is it the one where, when you're unconscious, one of the Anurupa ayatanas,
Mhm.
the upper ones, where you aren't, meditate on that. Is that kind of like a little boy pointing that way?
No. No, and actually what I'm trying to do with this talk to try to really highlight what makes Buddhism Buddhism and very unique is that Buddhism came out of a world and a culture in which if you weren't just trying to make it in this world, meaning like make money kind of a thing, if you were involved in spirituality or what have you, then the name of the game was to get a better rebirth. Maybe develop supernormal powers here, have a little fun, make a little money by, sideshow type of stuff. But the idea was you're doing all this for this goal, a better rebirth that could be in heaven or whatever it is. And the Buddha, and of course there were a few people in India that were talking about this. Buddhism just sort of, kept going and now we're here. But the Buddha's like, no, we've been thinking about this all wrong. And so this sort of, the emphasis that I'm trying to get across tonight is that Buddhism is talking about 100% total liberation right here, right now, not at some later point in time, and a type of liberation that's not relative to hell dwellers, that's not relative to heavenly beings and demigods and asuras and all of that. Because the idea of this liberation is that it is, well, I mean, it's indescribable by definition, but the idea is that it's, completely unattached, completely not associating with anything. For those, I see a lot of new faces, and so just to put it to you very, very, very bluntly, the idea here is that we are all attached, like clinging, like emotionally attached to this, what we think of as ourselves, right? And so the idea is that attachment, well, it's got a lot of problems and all of that, but the idea is that the Buddha is saying that to get out entirely it's a difficult but simple act of not being attached to the body. And what I mean by that simply is not identifying with the body, if that makes sense. Most of us identify with the body, right? That if if I show you a selfie and I'm like, that's me, I identify with the body, right? And I don't identify with Robert's body. That's his body. I don't identify with it. He might. I don't, though, right? I identify with this. Identify is code for I'm clinging and attached to this. And so the liberation actually comes from talk about a hack, because we're talking about a turning off of the association, identification, and therefore attachment to this body. Boom, and as soon as that attachment's gone, Mara loses. Dunzo. Right? This is radical technology. This is radical information, especially for a bunch of people that were really trying to get up to the heavenly realms. And the reason why the Buddha is called a teacher of gods and men is because the idea is that even the gods desire and therefore suffer. In fact, in some ways, they say they suffer even more. Because they never experience loss, they can just create stuff at will or have others create it for them if you're in that heaven. They never experience loss. And so they never actually get the bite of the desire. We humans are in this realm where we can kind of get the pleasure of it, but we get the bite as well. And so we're kind of constantly reminded that the fulfillment of desire is not necessarily happiness. Right? That's sort of the message here, is that these heavenly realms where you think you'll be happy, Buddhism is saying, no, I've got like a real happiness for you. And they talk about this. They use this word happiness. Like people give Buddhism a bad rap as this like dour religion or whatever. They're not dour. They're talking about a form of ecstasy, rapture, and happiness that's way more than you've ever had because all your rapture, ecstasy, and happiness has been dependent upon something you got, dependent on something you took, dependent on something. And they're talking about a happiness that's not dependent on anything. In fact, all suffering and samsara come from, if you followed that last little trip around the 12-link chain, all suffering is because of dependency, of everything depending on something else. And so it's not about identifying with the Buddha or identifying with the bodhisattvas or identifying with my sangha or identifying with something bigger or larger, identifying with God. No, the secret is don't identify with anything. Just don't do it. Can you do that? It's tricky because it's how we humans operate. We operate in that kind of a way, in a really identifying way. We wear these stickers like I'm a vegan, I'm a husband, I'm a Dharma teacher, I'm an American, I'm a this, I'm a that. We have all these labels of identification, our diet, our sexuality, all of these things. And Buddhism is saying that all these labels that we're attached to are actually causing us a lot of suffering. And I want to make it clear because again, there's a lot of new faces. I'm not talking about going out and eating animals then, or not. What I'm talking about is identifying as a vegan. I'm a vegan. I'm that. No, just don't eat animals, dude. You don't need to identify as something. Buddhism is actually saying that the identification problem is a problem. It keeps reinforcing ideas that are all ignorant and delusional to begin with. But again, I just wanted to make that caveat, though, that I'm saying you can still have your ethical moral behavior. And in fact, your ethical moral behavior will be even more righteous if you have no soapbox you're standing on with your labels, right? It's a really subtle message, and I know it's kind of tricky in the modern environment because labels and identity politics is really big. But I just want you to sort of think about this Buddhist thing. They're saying that our wanting things to be a certain way is causing us a little agitation, and we don't need to be agitated at all. But we're causing that because of these guys. All right. All right. Questions, answers, ideas, anything. All right, two, one in the back. Sure.
Another thing is that place of the fall that you went in the conditioning, we now have the science that behavioral kind of really is aligned with that. You see that the child developmental age there between 30 years of age, and they don't identify themselves with the other.
Yep.
But if they're like, confused, it's like not conditioned yet.
Yep. Yep.
Identify with somebody else, the mama, right?
Sure.
So there's like conditioning process. So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, Buddhism isn't one normally to romanticize or idealize that infantile state. They actually are, I don't want to say idealizing, but they are actually suggesting that the state of mind that's gone through all the conditioning and then out of it, now that's the enlightened mind. To just never have been conditioned is one thing, and maybe would mitigate suffering, maybe not. But the idea, though, of Buddhism, though, is that there's this, it's kind of like what I was saying with the gods, that because they don't suffer, the idea is that they never want to hear what the Buddha has to say, because they have no need to in that way. So Buddhism says that the human realm is really rather unique for having that 1 foot in ecstasy, 1 foot in the suffering, and so we have that taste of it. And so when we hear the Dharma, when we hear this about attachment, leading to suffering, it'd be like, you know what, I think there's something to that. But a God, he's going to be like, what? No, give me another round. Like, there's no reason not to have another round in the heavenly realms that way, right? So they are talking about this, like, importance of suffering in a way. And I'm not saying, like, but they call it a noble truth or noble suffering for a reason. There's, like, something about it. And so, yeah. But again, to your point about that, a lot of the science about the way the brain forms and the samskaras and all of that, yeah, a lot of this is lining up these days, for sure. For sure. Yeah?
If there is a reason for it, or just more facts? Like,
What was it?
if there is a reason for it, or it's more like facts? Like, there is a reason why people need to be in the whale and need to suffer to go out, or it's just like fact, we know it's like this, but there is not specific reason for it.
Yeah, the normal answer is that just we start with where we are at in that sense. Do you know what I mean? We start with where we're at, which is, I don't know, my day hasn't been perfect. I'll put it that way. I've experienced some suffering today. And so that's where I begin. You know what I mean? And so we could talk about being an unconditioned baby that isn't suffering. We talk about maybe the holy cow ruminating that's not suffering. But I'm not that. I'm not the baby. I'm a suffering human. So let's start there. And Buddhism is sort of about that, like, that's where we start. Yeah. Yeah, and there's a classic story about this with the guy that gets shot with the arrow. You heard this one? There's a warrior, Kshatriya warrior, big strong guy, right? And he gets shot with the arrow. And so he goes running to the doctor, and he's like, "Doc, I got shot with the arrow. I got to get back to the war. Quick, got to take it out." The doc's like, "All right." And then the doc goes to take it out, and the guy goes, "But wait, before you take it out, I got to know, is it a wooden arrow or is it made of bone?" And the guy's like, "Well, let me see." And he's like, "But wait, actually, before you know that, I need to know, was it tipped with this or was it tipped with that?" And then the doctor's like, "Well, hold on, let me check." And they go, but wait, but before I know that, I need to know, is the tail, is it feathered? And then the guy dies. And the doctor basically is like, "Well, if you'd let me help, I could have saved your life. But you had all these questions about where these things came from." That's the classic Buddhist answer, that knowing those detailed origins is not going to help get There was another question? Yes, sir. Observations are great.
In line with the question that was just asked, it seems to me that the answer to that would be like in the center of that wheel. Why can't we just sit around and be children? It's because in the center of the wheel, there's things like aversion. Like there's a natural aversion in life to doing that.
Yes. And that speaks to my thing about it. It's actually an even more enlightened state, the mind that has been deep in the greed and the hatred and the delusion and has then turned against the stream and come out of it. They're saying, like, that's an enlightened mind that has actually, been there and then said, "No, I'm going to turn away," versus the mind that's never experienced it. And then it's easy for that mind to not want, if you've never been to the Disneyland, you would never want to go to Disneyland. You wouldn't even know it exists in that way, right? So there's this idea of like that it's a really exalted state to have been to samsara and gotten out. Yeah, Katie.
On the getting out part, so even if you're in like the 8th dhyana in our book of absolute, you're still being held by Mara.
Yes.
So the only way out is to like run all the way back up the chain until you get to the first link, and then go the other way.
Sort of, but actually your question lets me put it a totally different way. And I kind of said this, but so remember when I was saying that the Buddha took a look at the situation where those beings that are up in the higher heavens, and they're like, "Woo, we made it," right? Now, of course, the irony is that you have to wait how many kalpas to prove that you've succeeded in making it to that highest realm, where you're like, "I made it past that last win. Told you." I'm being funny, but the idea here is that from a Buddhist point of view, when I said that to be in those upper realms, that your freedom and liberation was relative to and dependent on the hell dwellers. Another way of putting that is that that being, for lack of a better term, that being that is in the highest heaven, right? They're gone. They're like, they're just a breeze, right? While everybody else is suffering down in hell or suffering on earth, right? The idea is that that being is attached to a karmic axis that is out of the realm of desire, out of the realm of form. I'm in the formless realm or whatever. And the Buddha is saying that is not a real liberation if it is still clinging to anything that is anywhere. And so if you reach that state of true liberation, there's nobody being anywhere anytime and in that way. So that's way crazier than being in the formless realm. But it's in that your being there is, again, relative to the whole Lokadhatu and the hell dwellers. So it's just that it's almost like, it makes me really think of like wealth and poverty that way. That idea of being a rich person is dependent on a bunch of people with no money. And me being like, look at me, I got money. Those people don't. That's what makes me rich, is those people don't have money, right? Because just having a bunch of cotton, in your wallet doesn't make you rich, right? It's all relative. And so if that helps to think of it in those terms, Buddhism's talking about an independent wealth that is not, on fiat currency scheme. Yeah.
Yeah, can you remind me where the non-perception, not perceiving, where they're at? Because they're the ones who have made it and they are outside of this?
They are, and again, I kind of hesitated to put them anywhere because they're not in a little green cube at the top. That's just, again, convention. So, it's the idea that there is some sort of life force energy, but it is not being cognitively perceiving of anything, and also is fully disembodied, by the way. Anything up in those realms is just mentation, in a sense, right? And so it's hard to explain what or where those are.
But that is the getting to that point is complete escape then? Is that
No, that's what the Buddha denied. Everybody, even the Buddha's teachers, taught him, if you get up to the highest heaven, you're good, you're out. That's what we're all going for. We knew somebody last week got there, it's great. That's the idea. And the Buddha supposedly got there, hung out for a while, and said a lot of the things I said. That's relative, that's not permanent. People at the time thought it was permanent.
So ultimately, then, they are part of the destruction cycle, or is that?
It's not so much that they're part of the destruction cycle as that they eventually slip back down and get caught. And so their status as heavenly being is not ever permanent.
Thank you.
Yeah. Last one, really. Oh, no, it's okay. Exactly. Kind of. Yeah. But it is, again, that is the point of this Buddhist thing, is that it's not about good behavior to get a better rebirth, and not about that. It's about realizing something. And that, again, liberation right here and now. Pretty powerful. Really quick, just because the time is up, I just wanted to mention, next month, Land of the Buddhas. So my presentation next month, just to end this, is going to be on those other realms, the Buddha realms. And it's going to be a whole visual, many more slides, many more slides. And it's basically going to be a iconography description of how you can recognize what Buddha is what Buddha, what Bodhisattva is what Bodhisattva. Like I said, oh look, it's Amitabha, he's red. Everybody knows Amitabha has a red body. Maybe you don't know that. So next month I'm going to go over all of that last Friday in February. And that's all I got, folks. Thank you all so much. Thank you. My great pleasure. Happy to answer more questions and hang out, but that's like the end of the formal thing. Please feel free to mill about.
Siddhartha?
No. Siddhartha's our Buddha. Amitabha is a whole other
universal other look at that.
Streams these often and listens to them on SoundCloud, there is something very special about getting to be here in person. It just doesn't quite come across on the internet. So we are run entirely on donations from the Sangha. This Sangha is a reflection of the entire community. So please donate if you can. We're sustained entirely by mostly very small donations from everyone in this community. And in that way, we're truly a reflection of a creation of a dependently originated phenomenon of everyone in the Sangha. So please give what you can so that we can keep doing this. And coming up, we have some really exciting things. If you're not super into the whole super sports ball thing that's happening on Sunday, we have a full day-long class, 10 to 4, with Chandra Easton doing Lojong, which is cultivating compassion and insight. It's a very powerful practice, and we're really lucky to have her here doing that in person. Tomorrow night is Psychedelic Sangha, if you're into that sort of thing, or even if you're not, come by, it's cool. And then we have a 4-week class with Michael Taft starting, not this Tuesday, but next Tuesday, and he's going to teach his 4-level model of deconstructing the self and reaching pure awareness and then coming back. And it's a relatively new model, and he's still kind of workshopping it and taking input, so this is your chance to, that's the, yeah. Internally we're calling it the stack class. Okay. And then we made up this like 18-word title that sounds very good, but then we just kept calling it the stack class. So the stack class is starting. Not this Tuesday, next Tuesday the 11th, but it's a chance to get to know this meditation model while it's still in the early stages of creation, maybe provide some feedback on it, and be one of the first people in the world to kind of get good at it. So don't miss that. So please give what you can. Thanks for being here. Oh, and volunteer with us. We need volunteers. Oh, yes.
I teach every 7 o'clock.
Don't miss those classes. Those are awesome.
I'm doing full night on a sutra.